Something strange has been happening inside you lately. You have been getting better, not performing better, not telling yourself you are fine as a way of surviving the day. Actually better. The mornings are lighter. There are hours, sometimes full days, where the weight of this connection is not the first thing you feel when you wake up and not the last thing you feel before you sleep. You are doing things you stopped doing, laughing at things you forgot you found funny, making plans that are genuinely about your own life and not constructed around the hope that they will make you more magnetic or more healed in his direction. Choosing things because you want them, not because they serve the journey. You are healing, and it is terrifying, not because healing is bad. You know healing is not bad. You have read enough and sat with enough to understand, intellectually, that healing is the point, that the work is the point, that becoming yourself more fully is what the whole journey has been oriented toward from the beginning. But there is something happening underneath the knowing that the knowing does not fully reach. A quiet, creeping, specific guilt. The guilt that says, if I am actually getting better, maybe it means I am letting go of him. Maybe it means the connection is not what I thought it was. Maybe genuine people who are in something real do not start to feel this good on their own. Maybe my healing is a sign that I am moving on, and moving on means I was wrong about all of it. About him, about the soul contract, about the depth of what existed between us. That fear is what this video is about, not the healing, the guilt around it. If you have been moving through your own healing and finding yourself quietly afraid of what your healing means about the connection, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop "My healing is not a betrayal" in the comments. Because what the guilt is actually protecting, underneath its surface logic, is not the connection. It is a wound that existed long before he entered your life. And understanding that distinction changes everything about how you relate to your own growth. Before we go further, I want to speak directly to something you may be carrying right now that no one has named for you yet. You have been doing this work for a long time. Sitting with dreams and synchronicities and interior states that shift without warning. Navigating a connection that does not follow the rules of ordinary relationships. And somewhere inside all of that, you have been asking, quietly and persistently, whether what you are experiencing is real, whether what you are becoming is enough, and whether the specific map of your soul is pointing you towards something true or towards something you have constructed out of longing. A personal reading can answer questions that no video can reach, not a generic forecast. A reading that begins with your birth chart and moves through the specific astrological indicators tied to your twin flame connection, where you are in the journey, what the universe is currently building for you, what the soul contract between you actually contains underneath the confusion of separation. If you are ready to stop guessing and start seeing clearly, the link to the Twin Flame Union personal reading is in the description below. Your birth information is all you need to bring. The rest of the reading comes to you within 48 hours, in audio and in a detailed PDF you can return to again and again. The link is below. Now, back to the guilt. Here is the logic the guilt is running, even if you have not fully articulated it to yourself. You entered this journey in a state of profound connection to him. Everything you felt, everything you reached toward, everything you organized your inner life around was centered on the reality of this bond. You felt him, you dreamed him, you moved through your days with a peripheral awareness of his energy that was so constant it became a kind of atmosphere. Not obsession, something more fundamental than that. A background frequency that told you, this is real, this matters, pay attention. And somewhere in the months since the distance began, you started healing. Slowly at first, and then with more momentum. And as you healed, the frequency changed, not disappeared, changed. The constant background awareness became less constant, the reaching quieted. The days started to contain more of you and less of the waiting. And your mouth, watching this process, drew a conclusion. The conclusion was, if the connection is real, you would not be able to get better this much without him. If he were truly your twin flame, his absence would be permanently debilitating. The fact that you are not permanently debilitated, the fact that you can experience whole days of genuine lightness, the fact that you can laugh without guilt and make plans without them being secretly about the connection must mean one of two things. Either the connection was not what you thought it was, or you are betraying it. And because you cannot bring yourself to accept the first option, the guilt has chosen the second. This is the trap. And it is not a trap that comes from the journey. It comes from a wound that is much older than the journey. A wound that learned very early that love is proven through suffering. That caring about something means your suffering should scale with its importance. That the day you stop suffering is the day you stop loving. That wound is not wisdom, it is a pattern. And the specific thing that Chiron as an astrological archetype addresses, the specific territory that this transit on April 16th is moving through in collective consciousness, is exactly this. The place where healing and identity come into conflict. Where getting better feels like losing the thing you were suffering for. Where the relief of restoration is shadowed by the fear of what restoration means about who you were when you were in the wound. Chiron, the wounded healer. Not the healer who was never hurt. The healer who was hurt and could not heal himself but learned to heal others through that irreducible wound. The archetype of what happens when the wound becomes the teacher. When you stop trying to undo the damage and start letting the damage make you into someone it could not have made you otherwise. That is the transit you are inside right now, and the specific invitation of it is not to heal. Faster or heal. Better or heal more strategically. It is to examine the belief that your healing is a loss. To understand why the guilt feels so convincing, you have to look at where it learned to live. The guilt is not originating in the connection. It is originating in something you carried into the connection. A relational template formed long before he entered your life, probably long before you were old enough to name what was being learned. Most people who carry the wound that love requires, sacrifice built that understanding in an environment where love, or the closest available version of it, was conditional in a specific way. Not necessarily cruel, often genuinely loving, but organized around a dynamic where care and suffering were associated in a way that became internalized as a rule. Maybe the care in your early environment was most reliably present when something was wrong. When you were struggling, when you were sick, when you were visibly in need, not absent otherwise, but more consistent, more warm, more attentive in the moments of difficulty. And the part of you that was learning how relationships work took note, not consciously. Below the level of language, in the body, in the nervous system, in the architecture of expectation. It learned, when I suffer, I am seen. When I am fine, I am less visible. When I ask for nothing, I receive less. This is not a flaw in your parents or your caregivers. It is a very human pattern, replicated across generations because it was the pattern they inherited. But it becomes, in adult relationships and especially in the intensity of a twin flame dynamic, one of the most reliable saboteurs of genuine healing. Because if your system learned that love is proven through difficulty, then your healing is a threat to the proof. Healing means you are fine. Being fine means you are less visible. Being less visible means you are less loved. And if the connection is sustained by the suffering, then releasing the suffering releases the connection. That is the logic, and it is internally consistent within the wound's framework. The problem is the wound's framework is not true. Post-traumatic growth researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun spent decades documenting something that initially seemed counterintuitive to the field of trauma psychology. They found, across populations and cultures and types of devastating experience, that the most profound personal growth does not happen in spite of the wound. It happens because of engagement with the wound. Not because of the wound's continued presence, but because of the specific transformation that occurs when a person does not simply survive the difficult experience, but genuinely integrates it into a new understanding of who they are. Tedeschi and Calhoun named this post-traumatic growth, and the features of it are specific and documented. A greater sense of personal strength, new possibilities that were not visible before the experience, a deepening of relationships and an increased capacity for authentic connection, a spiritual deepening, an appreciation for life that people who have not been through significant difficulty rarely access in the same way. These are not consolation prizes. They are not what happens to people who fail to get what they actually wanted. They are the specific fruits of having gone through something real and come out the other side as someone who could not have existed without that passage. And the critical thing Tedeschi and Calhoun found is this: post-traumatic growth is not the same as the absence of pain. It is not healing that means you stopped caring. It is healing that happens while you still care, but in a way that is no longer organized around suffering as proof. In a way that has integrated the experience into a self that is genuinely larger because of what it moved through. That is what your healing is, not evidence that the connection was not real. Evidence that you were real enough to move through something genuinely difficult and become someone who could not have been reached by any other path. Here is what most people in this space do not talk about enough. Your healing is not neutral in the connection. It is not happening in a private interior bubble that has no relationship to what exists between the two of you energetically. The growth you are experiencing, the expansion of self that is happening as you move through this journey with genuine interior engagement, is actively changing the quality of what you are bringing to the field. Not because you are performing healing, because you are actually changing. And what changes in you changes what is available in the space between you. Twin flame connections are often described as mirrors. He reflects aspects of your own psyche back to you in ways that no ordinary relationship can replicate. That mirroring process is real, but the direction of the reflection is not one way. What you carry into the field, the quality of your energy, the interior state you are actually living from day to day, is also part of what gets reflected. The version of you that was organized around longing and waiting was reflecting that frequency into the field. The version of you that is healing, that is building a life, that is becoming herself more fully each week, is reflecting a completely different frequency. And the divine masculine, whatever his level of conscious awareness, is receiving the difference. Not as information, as a felt sense, as a shift in what he is receiving from the field he shares with you, whether either of you is consciously communicating or not. This is not mysticism for the sake of it. The literature on energetic resonance between closely bonded pairs, whether you approach it from a spirituality framework or from the interpersonal neurobiology work of researchers like Daniel Siegel, consistently points to the reality that deeply connected people affect each other's interior states through channels that do not require proximity or communication. When you are in the longing, the field carried that. When you are in the becoming, the field carries that. And the becoming is, paradoxically, far more attractive to the soul of the person who ran from the longing. He did not run from you. He ran from the specific dynamic the longing created. The dynamic that activated his own wound. The dynamic that felt like incoming pressure to a system that had learned to protect itself against the vulnerability of genuine intimacy. But the version of you that is healing, that is standing in yourself with an increasing groundedness that is not about him at all, that is not a dynamic he knows how to run from. Because it is not reaching toward him, it is moving in its own direction. And the soul that contracted with yours before either of you arrived in this life recognizes the sound of the frequency you are moving toward and is drawn toward it, not out of guilt or obligation or the pressure of your need, but out of something much older and much more certain. Your growth is not pulling you away from him. It is pulling you toward the version of the connection that could actually hold both of you. Tedeschi and Calhoun were careful to document that post-traumatic growth is not a linear process. It does not move in one direction. It coexists with grief, with setback, with days that feel like regression, with moments when the person in the middle of profound transformation genuinely cannot see that transformation because they are standing too close to it to have perspective. This is important to understand because the guilt you are feeling right now, this specific fear that your healing is a betrayal, is not a sign that you have gone off course. It is actually one of the documented features of the growth process itself. Tedeschi and Calhoun found something they called the narrative reconstruction process. After a deeply destabilizing experience, the person moving through it is required to rebuild their understanding of themselves, their world, and their future. The old narrative, the one that organized their identity and expectations before the experience, no longer holds. It was built for a version of reality that the experience shattered. And the work of post-traumatic growth is the slow, often painful work of constructing a new narrative that is large enough to contain both who you were before and who you are becoming. This reconstruction process is not smooth. It involves grief for the old narrative even as the new one is being built. It involves periods of not knowing who you are. It involves specific moments, like this one you are in now, where the growth confronts a belief that the old narrative depended on, and you are required to either hold on to the belief or release it in favor of the truth that the growth is revealing. The belief you are being asked to release right now is this: that genuine love requires your suffering. And releasing it is not betrayal. It is the most important piece of the growth. Because the version of this connection that existed when you were organized around the longing, as real and as powerful as that version was, could not have become what the connection is meant to become. Not because the love was insufficient, because the architecture of longing as the primary organizing energy was not a container strong enough for what was being asked of both of you. The longing was the beginning. The reaching was how you proved to yourself that this was real. The suffering was how you learned the precise contours of what you wanted and what you were willing to move through to get there. But it was never supposed to be the permanent structure. The permanent structure is what you are building now, in the healing, in the becoming, in the days where the weight is lighter and you are genuinely present to your own life and the love is still there. Still real, still yours, but it is no longer the wound. It is the ground. That is post-traumatic growth in its most specific application to a twin flame journey. The wound was the teacher. The healing is the graduation, and graduation is not abandoning the school. It is proof that the school did what it was designed to do. If you've been doing this work and you are ready to see how far you have actually come, the Twin Flame Journey Tracker and Progress Workbook was built for exactly where you are right now. 39 pages. An 8-stage journey tracker so you can locate yourself on the map instead of guessing. A synchronicity log where you record the signs and the dreams and the 1111 moments as they accumulate. A daily self-love checklist that keeps you as the center of your own story. Weekly reflection pages that reveal the patterns you are living inside. Monthly reviews that show you in black and white how much you have moved. You have been doing the work. This is the system that shows you what the work has built. The link is in the description. April 16th carries a transit that is precise in a way that deserves attention. The Sun conjuncts Chiron today in Aries, a transit astrologers call a Chiron Cazimi. The Sun sits at the exact degree of Chiron, 26 degrees of Aries, illuminating the archetype of the wounded healer in a way that Cazimi transits do, by burning away everything that is not essential, leaving only the clearest signal. Chiron Cazimi is not a gentle transit. It is not about comfort. It is about the specific moment of clarity that comes when the Sun, as the archetype of the self, the core identity, the center of individual awareness, meets the wound that has been shaping identity from beneath the surface for the entire duration of the journey. What Chiron carries in Aries is the wound to selfhood. The wound to the basic sense of being allowed to exist as you are, to take up space, to assert your own needs and desires and directions without that assertion feeling like a violation of something you owe to someone else. For the divine feminine in a twin flame journey, this wound has often expressed as the belief that her growth is conditional on his readiness, that she is not allowed to move forward until he does. That genuinely inhabiting her own life, genuinely getting better, genuinely becoming someone who is not organized around the connection, is a kind of disloyalty to a soul contract that requires her to wait. Chiron Cazimi today is illuminating that belief with the full brightness of the sun, not to shame it. To see it clearly enough to know that it is not the soul contract. It is the wound wearing the soul contract's clothing. Mercury is also exact on Neptune today, at 2 degrees of Aries, an aspect that gives the day a quality of revelation and dissolution simultaneously. The mental frameworks that have been organizing reality, the way you have been making sense of the healing and the guilt and the fear underneath both, are in a state of dissolve right now, which means something new can be received. Not constructed through effort or analysis. Received, the way impressions arrive in the quiet after the mental noise has settled. And the new moon arrives tomorrow in Aries at 27 degrees, bringing the lunation directly over Chiron's position. Tomorrow's new beginning is seated in today's illumination. Whatever you are willing to see today about the wound that has been calling itself loyalty, that seeing becomes the seed of the cycle that begins tomorrow. 7 planets are currently in Aries. The concentration of energy in the sign of the self, of individual identity, of the basic assertion of existence is not accidental context for a transit about healing being confused with betrayal. It is the entire sky saying the self is what is being asked for right now. Not sacrifice, not deferral, not the particular form of love that empties itself out to prove its sincerity, the self. Yours, specifically and non-negotiably yours. Let me say something directly. Your healing is the most significant evidence you could offer that the connection was real. Not because genuine connections make you fine with the absence, but because genuine connections, the ones that are seated at soul level, are specifically designed to produce the kind of growth that this journey has been producing in you. The pain was not incidental. The difficulty was not a flaw in the design. The specific contours of what the separation asked you to move through were shaped, at a level deeper than conscious intention, by exactly what you needed to become in order to be capable of what the union is asking you to hold. Post-traumatic growth research shows something that, when you hear it for the first time, sounds backwards. Titici and Calhoun found that the magnitude of the growth is correlated with the magnitude of the challenge. Not proportionally in the sense that bigger suffering automatically produces more growth, but in the sense that the specific territory of growth that a person can access is related to the specific territory of difficulty they moved through. You cannot grow in a direction that was not opened by the path you walked. The direction that your journey has opened is the direction of the self. The you that existed before this connection was real and capable and already carrying gifts that the journey has since developed. But she was, in specific ways, organized around others, around proving that she was worth loving, around the particular kind of vigilance that people who are not consistently seen in early life learn as a way of maintaining connection, around earning her place in the relationships that mattered to her by being indispensable, by meeting needs before they were stated, by being less inconveniently herself than the full version of herself would have required. He arrived and broke that open. Not because he intended to, because his specific wound, his specific form of unavailability, was precisely calibrated to trigger the very pattern that most needed examining. The reaching produced by his distance revealed how much of your sense of self had been organized around external confirmation. The longing showed you what it felt like to be unmoored from yourself in the specific direction of another person's approval. The suffering pointed consistently and without mercy to the wound underneath it. And the healing, the specific healing you are now in, is the result of having followed all of that pointing down to the root. The root is not him. The root is the belief that you are most real when you are needed, most lovable when you are suffering, most connected when you are in pain. Healing that belief is not moving away from the connection. It is becoming the version of yourself that the connection was always trying to produce. There is a difference between releasing the connection and releasing the suffering. That distinction is the one the guilt is failing to make. Releasing the connection would mean choosing, consciously, to walk away from the soul recognition in the contract and the specific love that exists between you and him. It would mean deciding that the journey was not what it was, that the experiences you had were not real, that the person you encountered in him was not who you felt him to be at the soul level. That is not what is happening. What is happening is different. You are releasing the suffering that you mistook for the connection. You are releasing the longing as the organizing principle of your daily life. You are releasing the specific version of love that required you to be in pain in order to prove it was real. Those releases do not diminish the connection. They clarify it. Because the suffering was never the connection. It was the reaction of your wound to the specific conditions the connection created. It was the sound of early patterns meeting current reality and finding a mismatch they did not know how to resolve except through reaching and waiting and the particular kind of devotion that empties itself out. The connection, stripped of the suffering, does not become smaller. It becomes more itself. And the self that remains after you release the suffering, the self that can love genuinely without organizing itself around the pain as proof, that self is larger than the one who entered this journey, more grounded, more capable, more genuinely available for the actual depth of what the connection was always moving toward. That is what Tedeschi and Calhoun found in the people they studied who had moved all the way through post-traumatic growth rather than stopping partway. The people who completed the process did not lose their capacity for connection. They developed a new kind of capacity for it. A capacity that was not organized around need or fear or the particular fragility of a self that requires external confirmation to feel real. They developed the capacity for what those researchers called a new sense of possibilities. Not just doing things differently, seeing a different range of what was possible. For themselves, for their relationships, for the kind of life that was available to them now that the wound was no longer filtering everything through its particular requirements. That is the range you are entering, and it does not take him out of the picture. It puts you in it, fully and without apology, in a way that creates the conditions for the connection to become what it was always meant to become. Not a longing met. A meeting between two people who have each done the specific work of becoming someone the other can genuinely encounter. This is the simplest thing and the hardest to receive. You are allowed to be well. Not because the connection is over, because the connection was never asking you to be unwell. That was the wound. That was the old learning that said love is proven through sacrifice and presence, is earned through suffering, and devotion is measured in pain. The soul contract between you and him did not include a clause requiring you to remain in a state of longing in order to maintain it. The contract, if you can sense it underneath the wound's interpretation of it, says something much simpler. Be yourself. Become more fully yourself. Do the work of growing into the person that the journey is calling you to be. Not for him, for yourself, and in so doing, for the version of this connection that requires that person. The Chiron Cazimi today is illuminating something in the collective field that your healing is a part of. The wounded healer does not stop being the wounded healer because the wound is integrating. That is actually the moment when the healer becomes most fully themselves. The wound integrated is not the wound erased. It is the wound transformed into the specific kind of knowing that could not have been reached any other way. You know things now that you could not have known before this journey. About yourself. About love. About the specific difference between a love that empties and a love that builds. About the version of connection that requires you to disappear into it and the version that asks you to arrive more fully. That knowing is the gift the wound always contained, and you are allowed to be well enough to receive it. The healing is not a sign that you have stopped loving him. It is a sign that you have started, finally, to love yourself in the same register that you have been offering him, with the same generosity, the same patience, the same willingness to see the best version rather than being blinded by the current evidence. The specific transit of this week, the sun burning bright on Chiron, Mercury dissolving the old mental frameworks on Neptune, 7 planets in the sign of the self, gathered around the approaching new moon, this is not coincidental timing for a video about guilt and healing. This is the sky making a specific statement. The statement is, the self is not the sacrifice. The self is the offering. Your becoming is not what is standing between you and this connection. Your becoming is what the connection has always been building toward. And you're allowed, fully and without guilt, to be exactly where you are, which is on your way, not away from him, toward the version of this that was always waiting on the other side of the wound. That is what healing is. That is what it has always been. Go be well. You have earned it.